This is called Jesus and the Chihuahua. Not yet. Media can be very pervasive in a young man's life. I grew up in a very conservative Mormon household, and this really shaped a lot of my ideas about the world. We didn't have access to a whole lot of what we called secular media. At the age of 15, I had never seen a movie rated higher than G. Most of our media, all of our books, our music, our television, our movies, was produced by the Mormon Church, or at least in some way Mormon approved. We watched a lot, when I was really young, we watched a lot of the animated scripture stories, you know, that would show people heroes from the Bible, David and Goliath. But we also had the Book of Mormon, so we'd have other heroes that you probably never heard of. And my favorite story in those animated characters was Joseph and the amazing colored dream coat, right? It was really my first exposure to a gay man's obsession with fashion. Now that I think about it. I'm serious, because if you, in that cartoon, there's a scene where the dad gives him the coat and he spins around so you can see the full array of color, and it looks like something out of RuPaul's Drag Race. I mean, it really does. Now I recognize that. But I really enjoyed those when I was really young. But as we got older, we watched a lot of those really corny 80s-esque films about morals, you know, those TV specials that really targeted young teenagers. But these were the Mormon version, right? So they were always about not cheating on the test or in some way being honest, really good classic stuff. But the most pervasive of all of the themes were movies that dealt with serving a 2-year mission for the Mormon Church. That was the most important thing that was drilled into our heads from day one, especially as a young boy, that all men should go out and serve a 2-year mission. It was your destiny, it was a commandment. And the films depicted this in such a grandiose way. They all kind of followed the same formula. So you would have this young man who valiantly decides to serve a mission. Sometimes he had some troubled teenage years that he's overcome. He goes on the mission, and inevitably he's faced with struggles or tests of his faith. And then something happens, some miraculous moment, something changes. He meets someone that he teaches that really gets the full length of everything they're trying to tell him, and their lives change, and then his attitude changes, and he goes on to baptize hundreds of people and heal the sick and perform miracles, right? So that's the stuff that was in my head about what happened on a Mormon mission, and I was down for the cause. I was ready to go do that. So I signed up to serve a mission for the church. Most of you probably don't know what that entails. For a young man, ages 18 to 26, as I mentioned, it's a commandment, and it's a 2-year period. And before you go, you have no idea where you're going to be sent or what language you're going to be assigned to teach in. Young women can go on the mission as well, but they have to be a little bit older, and they only go for 18 months so that, you know, marriage and raising Mormon children, a woman's real purpose, can remain their primary, you know, thing that they do. But I went on my mission, and I was called to serve in Orlando, Florida, speaking Spanish. Now, prior to my mission, other than being able to confidently order what I then called a Quizadella at the Taco Bell drive-thru, I had no knowledge of the Spanish language, none. So before you go on your mission, you're sent to what's called the Missionary Training Center, or the MTC. And you're there for a varied period of time, depending on whether or not you have to learn a language or all the different things. And you're taught what it's like to be a missionary. And I have to say that those themes that were given us in those movies as I was growing up were repeated in the MTC. Again, this was this grand thing that you were about to go do. And you were going to heal sick. And you were going to baptize people. And you were going to bring light into people's lives. And so it really gets you pumped up. There was actually a simulated hallway that was full of doors. And there were volunteers behind each of these doors, and behind each of these doors was a mock living room, and you would practice knocking on the door and doing like a sales pitch to the person at the door, and then you would give them a lesson, and the whole thing was videotaped, and they would analyze it afterwards to see how you did. Because sometimes miracles involve learning a little bit about car salesmanship. So we did all of that. Because I was learning a language, I stayed in the MTC a little bit longer, and you leave the MTC knowing precisely zip about any language that you learn. I had it easy because some folks go in to learn Mandarin, and you get 3 months, and you should be fluent in Mandarin. That's the expectation, right? And again, you're surrounded by white people who only speak English, so good luck with that. I had to learn Spanish, and I had 9 weeks. So you really learn the language when you're in the field, when you're out there, because you only interact with people who really speak that language. Most of my friends went to places like Honduras or Mexico. Again, I went to Orlando, Florida. And there are parts of Orlando, Florida that are kind of like Mexico or Honduras, and a lot of people just speak Spanish. So after about 6 months, you start to get the feel for that language. I was completely committed to this cause, and in about 7.5 months, I really had the language down, and I was working my way up the leadership levels of the mission. At that time, I was a district leader over about 8 other missionaries. I one day found myself out with a very young missionary who had only been in the field for about 3 weeks and who knew nothing about Spanish except for some memorized segments about Jesus and about how Joseph Smith was a true prophet. Because sometimes miracles require rote memorization. I just want to point that out. So we set out throughout the day to go knock on doors and try to find people. At one point in the day, a member friend of ours, someone from a local congregation, joined us. He was this giant Dominican man who was always very serious. And he was actually really intimidating, and I was terrified of him. But he was always down for the cause. He was always willing to come and help us, to go out on mission trips with us and to try to teach people. And that day we were going to try to follow up with people that at one point had expressed interest, but then we never talked to them again. Believe it or not, when you knock on someone's door and try to come into their house to teach them why everything they think they know about God may be wrong, and the only way we're allowed to be baptized is through the Mormon church, and that's how you get saved, they can find that to be a bit intrusive. Now, those videos taught me nothing about that. I had no idea that people could be so stubborn. So we had one person that was really promising. Her name was Maria, and she had said that we could come back, but then, she wasn't there for the appointment. We had gone back a couple of times and never found her. So this day I take this new missionary, his name was Elder Smith, and I take this member friend of ours, and we go and we knock on the door. We knock on the door, and Maria answers. Already, things are looking up. Okay. Then we asked Maria, does she have time right now for us to come in and teach her a short lesson, only about 20 minutes? And she says yes. Double miracle, okay? I was positive that this was going to be that moment. I had been on my mission for 7.5 months, but I'd never had that moment where everything just picks up and takes off, that magical spiritual journey. So this lesson was going to be that lesson. I was really excited about it. We go in, and typically what happens is we teach people 7 lessons before they get baptized into the Mormon church. And I was sure that this lesson was going to go so well that Maria would want to get baptized right then and there. And I was already kind of calculating if her bathtub would be deep enough for me to do it. I was thinking big, folks. I was thinking big. And so we go in, we start the lesson, and Mormons are really good at setting the scene. We speak in hushed, reverent tones. We declare divine truths about how God loves us. And then we ask our investigators, that's what we called people who would listen to us, to reveal some personal, unique truth of their own. Something like how they loved their mother. Something really unique that no one else had, right? So they could feel the spirit of this lesson. And then we would close with a prayer, and we would give them some sort of follow-up task to do before we came back. So we got into the lesson. I expressed to Maria how happy I was that we'd found her at home that day, and that I knew that God wanted her to hear the message that we had to share with her. I began to talk into the lesson, and I noticed that Maria had a small yappy chihuahua. Now, my companion missionary, Elder Smith, was playing with the chihuahua not to distract from the mood that we were so deliberately setting. We also used that trick with noisy children, something we learned in the MTC, because sometimes miracles require strategy. Okay. So he's playing with the chihuahua. I'm really not paying attention to what's happening. I'm filled with the Spirit. I'm sure that this is going to be the moment. This is going to be the time that everything turns around in my mission. So I was shocked when, at the time it came for Elder Smith to present his section, the chihuahua left Elder Smith and began to hump my leg like a teen virgin on prom night. I mean, just vigorously going at it. I didn't know what to do. But Elder Smith's lesson, Elder Smith's memorized part, was the most important part of this entire experience. He was going to talk about Joseph Smith And believe it or not, if you don't have a very serious tone and keep eye contact, people can find it hard to believe that God the Father and Jesus Christ appeared in the flesh to a young boy in upstate New York in 1820. It's, again, people can be really stubborn. No one had taught me that. I didn't know. So I'm trying my best to just pat the dog and give him some attention, but nothing is stopping his little perverted thing that he was doing to my leg. Right as Elder Welling reached his climactic point and finished, so did the Chihuahua. And as hot dog jizz hit the mid-calf of my dress pants, I was supposed to take over and talk about Jesus and the sacrifice of Jesus. I had hoped that no one had noticed what had happened. That was not the case. And instead, Maria jumped up with this embarrassed noise and took the fertile young pup and locked him into a bathroom and then came back and sat down and looked embarrassed but ready to give us another shot to keep talking. I was not as lucky with our member friend, however. He started laughing and his giant Dominican frame was shaking up and down, and so I gave him a minute, and then I started back, and every time I would begin again, he would get the giggles, and he couldn't stop laughing. I was trying to talk about Jesus, and all he could think about was how I'd gotten owned by a 5-pound Chihuahua. I could see that eventually nothing was going to come of this lesson, so I wrapped it up. I tried to bring it back to the message, and Maria assured us that we would be able to come back. Typically, when we closed our first lesson, we asked everyone there to kneel with us in prayer to show reverence for the topic. Now, that was such a part of my script that I hadn't even thought about all of the things that had just previously happened. And as we knelt down and our member friend began to pray a very sincere prayer asking for the Spirit, I realized that I had knelt in what was left of the gift that the Chihuahua had left. And so now I had a stain about mid-calf on one leg and a stain at the knee on the other leg. Now, I have to say that this was not the miracle I had been anticipating. I've thought a lot about this experience over the years since my mission. I have thought a lot about everything that I thought was going to happen, all of the baptizing of hundreds and the miracles, and I have to say none of that stuff really happened. I had some success, and I'm actually grateful for my experience. There were some really hard moments that taught me good work ethic. There were also some funny and lighthearted moments. And I realized that, while none of those miracles happened, perhaps just the fact that I made it out with my sanity was the miracle, or perhaps it was just that I discovered I'm a dog person.